Now joining me is Shadow Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho. Lovely to see you this morning, Ms Coutinho. Let's talk about our sky-high energy bills. Now, we've had energy bosses saying that net zero will continue to add up to £300 to household bills by the end of this Parliament. And I'm starting to think, I don't know what you think, that because of the failure of successive governments on this issue, that we must just make ourselves immune to the idea of paying the highest energy costs in Europe.
Well, here's the problem. The Climate Change Act is forcing ministers to prioritise decarbonisation above everything else, including lowering bills. And that's a massive problem for the country, because at the moment we have some of the cleanest electricity in the world, but it's also the most expensive. So we've been very clear. You know, I acknowledge in the past that we signed up to legislation. Obviously, when I was in government, I started a reset, and Kemi Badenoch had spoken up before. But we have to go further. We have to repeal the Climate Change Act. We have to put cheaper energy first. And actually what you've seen from us in the last couple of weeks is I've set out a cheap power plan that would cut everybody's electricity bills by 20% instantly. That's something that ministers could do tomorrow, and it would deal with the most important problem that we've got in energy policy, which is that we've got the highest electricity prices in the world.
I understand this whole argument that you're under new management and things have changed and all the rest of it, and I do respect that. You did once tweet, "We are fully committed to net zero by 2050, and then we look at the history of high standing charges and also very heavy green levies that have added to our bills. You know, net zero was made legally binding by Theresa May. Boris Johnson then introduced the memorandum on fracking. We then had, before that, David Cameron hugging Huskies, coming out with his coal phase-out policy. We've had huge amounts of green levies placed on our bills. So it's all very well saying this now, but the GB News audience will rightly blame the Tories for part of this mess that we now find ourselves in. That is a fair criticism, isn't it?
Well, look, I don't deny the party's been on a journey. What I will say is that when that legislation was passed by Theresa May, I wasn't in Parliament then, but Kemi Badenoch was one of two people in the entirety of Parliament who spoke up and said, I'm worried about costs. When I came in to be Energy Secretary, you mentioned that tweet, but that's also in the context of me being the first person in that job to push back bans on consumers, on their cars and their boilers, to say I was very worried about costs. And actually, I was being sued by multiple climate change activists for the changes I made. So you can argue that we didn't go far enough in government, but certainly what I did at the time was controversial. And actually what's happened since then is the cost of energy work I started in the department to look at the true cost of renewables has been cancelled by Ed Miliband, and he has been promising people that he will cut their bills by £300. And we just know that is not true. In fact, I think you mentioned energy bosses this week said it's a barefaced lie. There is no evidence that he's ever published to stack up that claim. It is a barefaced lie. And actually what energy bosses said just this week in Parliament is that even if gas was free, people's energy bills will go up because of all of the extra costs in Ed's plans. Now, that's just not right. We know people are struggling, and we know that they're particularly struggling with energy bills. So that's why our plan would cut people's electricity bills by 20%. And like I said, the government could do that tomorrow.
Okay. I mean, where do you now stand on fossil fuels? Because, again, I refer back to David Cameron and others. There was this Tory project to phase out fossil fuels. You're now beginning to regret that. You've been very critical of Miliband cancelling those new licences for North Sea oil and gas. We're now apparently at the kind of precipice of an AI revolution. That's going to need to be fuelled literally by a huge amount of fossil fuels for it to maintain the aspirations of the current government. So where are we? Are you now in the kind of zone of drill, baby, drill?
Well, firstly, I was like that in government. I was the person legislating to protect North Sea oil and gas licences and was very clear that I thought the North Sea was important because we're going to need oil and gas for decades. I was also the person in government who said we need to build gas power plants, and I particularly mentioned AI and the needs of that energy sector. Now, that was a speech and a position that, you know, within the civil service I was told not to take because it would make me a pariah, and I made it anyway, because the truth is this: we can either be a poor country with very high electricity prices who won't won't have affected climate change, because these AI businesses will just set up somewhere else in the world, or we can grip the problem that we have, which is very, very high energy prices, and we can make sure that businesses can start here, that we can have jobs, and that people's bills can come down.
Will the Tories advocate fracking?
We're living in a time of what feels like pretty significant social change, and it makes us question things that we've even taken for granted for decades. And one of those at the moment that people are wondering about is actually money. Is the money in your bank account safe? Should you be investing elsewhere? Are we looking at a potential global crash? What will it mean for your savings? Is there a way that you could be using your money that might be outside of government control even? Well, TallyMoney is potentially one solution. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by the CEO and founder of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. What is TallyMoney?
Well, at TallyMoney, you basically get gold you can spend. So we give people an individual account in their name, everyday account. They get a sort code, an account number. They use that account just like they would pounds from their bank, but it's milligrams of gold that we brand as Tally.
Okay. Why would you do that, though? What is the benefit to the customer instead of just having a normal pound sterling account?
Gold's performance against the pound is above 11% per annum over the last 25 years on average. But we still need money in our daily lives, and we have savings. We know that it's good common sense and prudent to save up for things, not just living credit. You know, whether it's a holiday or a rainy day, your retirement planning, you need to have money in your life, basically, that you can rely on, that's dependable, that nobody meddles with, that nobody can weaponise against you, which is another element of government control when it's the government currency, which we could talk about another time. And it should be pretty simple and straightforward, and that's what we deliver at Tally. And really, we just want people to feel safe and happy with their money. There was a time when the bigger your bank balance, the more confident you felt. Now it's like, I need to do something with it. I can't leave it there. In Tally, you can.
Okay, brilliant. Cameron Parry from TallyMoney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.
So I don't think it should be imposed on communities, and I think the priority has to be the North Sea. But what we've said when it comes to gas is that, yes, there would be more gas in the system than under Ed's approach if it made people's bills lower. And we know at the moment, gas without a carbon tax is £55. He's signing up to a new wind auction. He said he's willing to pay up to £117 for 20-year fixed contracts for offshore wind. What he hasn't explained to anyone is what are these higher prices, which will be locked into for decades. How on earth can that cut bills? It simply doesn't make sense. So our priority for energy is use what's cheap. We've got to bring the cost of electricity down, and the priority has to be to do that as quickly as possible.
We would put all this to Ed Miliband, by the way, but he refuses to do my show for some reason. I can't think why. What's your analysis of the Chinese spying scandal in the context of Miliband's energy policy? Because, of course, Labour have come under heavy scrutiny because of the use of wind turbines, electric vehicles and solar panels, which all require components from China. Serious concerns raised by your colleague Ian Duncan-Smith and others about the use of slave labour to make those parts that we're all apparently adopting over here to be more progressive. Is there a link to the Chinese spying scandal in Miliband's relationship with Beijing?
Well, firstly, let me say this. Keir Starmer said that there was no political involvement, but if you look at the text, there's lines that have been lifted from the Labour manifesto. So either he's misled the House, or something which is possibly even worse still, everybody knew about this and politicians didn't get involved, even though this was a case about people spying on Britain for China. So, I mean, I think they're in a real muddle over this. And just to come back to your question, yes, Ed went to Beijing, and unlike all of the times that I did deals with other countries, he has not published the full text of what was agreed. And that is something which I think is incredibly worrying, this air of sort of secrecy around the Labour Party's dealings with China. And I've spoken again very publicly multiple times about the worry that we are building a reliance on China when it comes to our energy system, whether it's solar panels or critical minerals or batteries or cables. We've just seen a position where Europe had to wean itself off Russian oil and gas. We can't then become dependent on China for all of those things. So yes, we have to care very deeply. It's one of the reasons that I'm such a big advocate of nuclear power, because actually we can own and build a lot of the supply chain here. So
I know,
it is
but
very
you could have
important
done
that we
nuclear years
understand who
ago.
is a threat to this country.
You could have done nuclear years ago.
So
You're in partnership with Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg's like, oh, we can't do nuclear because it's going to take too long. But anyway, hang on, I want to move on to another question.
Well,
when it comes to the Prime Minister misleading the Commons, why don't you all put your money where your mouth is and call for his resignation? If you're saying he's lied to the House of Commons, the Prime Minister must resign.
Well, so we have put those questions to Keir. I'm sure there'll be many unhappy at my side to call for the Prime Minister to resign.
Well, will you?
But I don't think that's the challenge. But we have put those questions. Well, I think he needs to be clear about what's happened. And the thing about misleading the House is it's somehow become, under this Labour government, a very trivial thing to do. But it's not. It's a serious matter. And what he's tried to turn this China case into is some sort of political tussle. And it's not. It's a question of national security. And like I said, either he's misled the House because there was political involvement and he's told the House there wasn't, or something which is possibly even worse, is that politicians were aware that this case was going to collapse and they didn't get involved.
OK, so the Prime Minister needs to consider his position very seriously.
Well, I think if he's lied to the House, then yes.
OK, and then on to your own matters. This mega poll putting the Tories on 7 seats. It puts Labour on third place behind the Liberal Democrats, but it suggests that at the next general election, you will be reduced from 121 MPs to 7. Claire Coutinho, how has it come to this?
Well, look, the point of opposition is not only to scrutinise the government, but it's also to look at where you went wrong, and that is the work that's being done. So, one of the things I think that we got wrong, and I've said that very publicly, is we signed up to net zero legislation that we shouldn't have. One of the other areas which Kemi has set up very clearly is we want to back the strivers and the aspirational people in this country. That's why she set out plans to abolish business rates on the high street. That's why she set out plans to cut stamp duty so that people can have an easier time trying to own their home. So the work that we have to do is to look at where we went wrong, and the duty of us, I think, as the Conservative Party, is to make sure that at the next election there is a party on the ballot that people can vote for who are strong on the economy and also strong on borders, and that is what we will work to be.
All right, Claire Coutinho, thank you very much indeed for joining me on my GB News show this morning.